You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast and check us out online at beardedtheologians.com.
I know one of the things that your church does really well, George, is celebration of recovery ministries. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that and talking about your guys' experience with that?
Sure. I have to get a little autobiographical. I am a grateful Christian in recovery from alcohol and drug addiction and codependence. It's a part of my family story. I have a family that was deeply addicted, particularly on the men in my family, father, grandfather, older brother, and even my younger son has struggled with addictions. And so it's a part of our family story. It's a part of the beautiful mess that is our family. And so I would not have, when I was in seminary, interestingly enough, I would not have self-identified as a drug addict or an alcoholic. It was really, ironically, through the ordination process that I came to terms with that this was a family disease, and indeed that my drinking and my drugging were the ways that I processed, even sadly, I would say after I became a Christ follower, were ways that I sadly processed kind of my own personal pain and the pain of my life and my family. It was my brokenness. It was my disease. So, Rick Warren has this great line. He says, "You attract who you are, not who you want to be." My own story is a story of addiction and brokenness, family of origin brokenness. And so my ministry has always kind of had that flavor to it. I came to Christ in very late high school, so I wasn't kind of like raised in the church, and I didn't go to church camp, and didn't do all those kinds of deals. So I didn't have the kind of religious and spiritual memory, which I don't paint that negatively. I'm just saying that wasn't my story. So I started hearing about this church in California that was doing this thing called Celebrate Recovery. By that time, my brother had got into recovery. By that time, I had begun my own recovery journey, and heard about this church, Saddleback Church, that was integrating the Christian faith with the 12 steps. And a generation before that, there was an author by the name of Keith Miller, J. Keith Miller, who had written some books that had kind of a serenity theme to it. It interwove, again, scripture and the 12 steps and, the sacraments and those kinds of deals. And I was very intrigued by all of that. Celebrate Recovery kind of became a model. It's not the model. I'm very careful to say that, of integrating biblical material and the 12 steps, and particularly owning Jesus as your higher power, and not just some generic higher power, but Jesus as your higher power. And yet staying very committed to these very tested, very faithful steps that Bill W. and his colleagues had developed that we now call the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so when at a previous church before coming here 21 years ago, I was able to be part of a little team that planted a Celebrate Recovery on a Friday night at our church. So I got to see it really, really attract people who would not typically step in the doors of a church. But because of the desperation of their life and because of what we were offering, they would come. So when I got here 21 years ago, church was in serious decline. It was a mess. Within about 3 years or so, I came in 96 and late 96, and by January of 2000, so 3 years and a few months, we had raised up a little small leadership team, and we launched Celebrate Recovery in January of 2000. It was little did I know that it would become one of the most defining moments in the history of this church. as we started with with a relatively small group, and it now has grown to involve many hundreds of people who come on a weekly basis to one of our campuses to recovery ministries. We have about 1,000 people a week that are involved in either traditional or Christian recovery, all of them using the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it has become, for the church, this great portal to help people. And ironically, it's been from both directions, and here's what I mean from both directions. It's been from, I sometimes say, some people come in on Friday night, that's the night we hold Celebrate Recovery, and they gravitate towards Sunday morning. And those are miraculous. It's wonderful to see. They typically live in both of those faith communities that are housed at this church. But one of the real cool things is to see people from Sunday morning who wouldn't necessarily self-identify as being a drug addict or an alcoholic, but they might struggle with codependency or anger or sexual addiction or financial addiction or nicotine addiction or any number of things. And they gravitate from Sunday morning to Friday night. And it's really kind of a cool thing to see them come alive in their own spiritual life. And then ironically, I didn't know this when we started this, but ironically, I discovered about 15 years ago, we're now in our 17th year of doing this, but I discovered 15 years ago that the early Methodist movement did this. That for John and Charles Wesley and that early leadership team, they developed United Societies and Classes and Bands, these series of larger groups and that got down to smaller groups, these bands, where people would meet together for spiritual formation and accountability. But that there was a fourth group that I had somehow, I'm sure I was taught in seminary, but I don't remember it. It was in the mix of the fire hydrant that is seminary. There was a fourth kind of group that Wesley had called the Penitent Band. And it was a band of men and women who couldn't live up to the rigors of the societies and the bands, the societies, classes, and bands, but still desired to grow in Christ. And Wesley put them on Saturday night, in his words, to keep them out of their old haunts. That was a great word. Because
word.
Yeah, they keep them out of their old haunts. And they would meet on Saturday nights. They had a class leader that would meet with them, and they basically would slow the process down. And it was rigorous in its formation. And Dr. Michael Henderson says it was similar to today's Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was primarily made up of men and women who struggled with alcohol, but who desired to grow in grace. And so they had this kind of special place for them on Friday night. So little did I know that this was a part of our Wesleyan DNA, this idea that we would engage with people at their, basis, most broken place, and that this grace of God could help people, excel in their life and in their spirituality and their walk with God.
So with it, I've done a lot of research, just the latter part of this last year on the bands and classes and societies, and in particular the bands, because we've really gotten away from that style of ministry and actually coming together. We the closest thing we might have is an accountability group, outside of a Celebrate Recovery and things that are super intentional. But we've really gotten away from that for the whole church, for the general population or for the entire population, of coming together and having those moments of confession and those moments of coming together and saying, here's where I am, here's where God's working in my life, I need all of your help, and walking down this journey together. We've lost so much of that, and it's hadn't been any time recent. I mean, we lost it before Wesley died. I mean, that was his biggest fear, that these would go away, and they went away. But recapturing that idea, like you say, in these really intentional places like Celebrate Recovery and the 12-step programs, but also bringing people from Sunday out of Sunday and into these spaces to have these conversations, to be open and honest about themselves and with each other. For no other reason than to come closer to God. Yeah. And that's a huge step forward, and something I hope that we begin to recapture.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I after reading the book, The Class Meeting, I'm drawing a blank. Teaches at Candler School. After reading that little book, and he basically says that there are three kinds of groups that we have. There are kind of affinity groups, and there are informational groups, and there are fellowship groups. But he says what we're missing, that's kind of the core of who we are as Wesleyans, was this accountability, this gracious accountability, where we're watching over one another in love. I've been very blessed. I've been a part of a pastor's covenant group for 26 and a half years. So for really the long run of my ministry, it started when I was pretty fresh out of seminary. I'm just now passing my 30th year, I think last year. So, pretty early in my ministry journey, I saw a generation of pastors in my conference in front of me that were doing that. And really, they were pastors that I loved and aspired to be like. I hope to pray in a healthy way. And I said, well, if they're doing it, then I need to do it. And so I got in this group, and it's been 26 and a half years. And these are the guys that, have held my feet to the fire to be a better husband and father and better pastor, and most importantly, a better follower of Jesus. These are the guys that hold me accountable. I travel quite a bit speaking in a lot of Methodist circles, and these are the guys that, say, hey, George, are you not watching stuff on the internet that you shouldn't be watching? Maybe, I don't know the numbers. I keep hearing 60 to 80% of men struggle with pornography. It's something that somebody's got to watch over our soul, if you will, in the midst of all of that. And I could lie to them, and it is possible, but they're asking the question, and I'm trying to be as honest with them as I can, and do that. And it's a part of what I think is missing. And it's interesting because in a typical church like the ones that the three of us pastor, we would put up right at the top of the list of kind of the most spiritual people, folks that are going through Jim Harnish's The Wesleyan Way book and fill out all the blanks. And we kind of go, yay, way to go, you're the best person in the world. But if we were to say to them, who asks you the question, how is it with your soul? We're likely to get the dumb stare, nobody,
Right.
And, sometimes when I'm on my high horse around this one, I'll say, don't say you're a Methodist if you're not in a small accountable group. And I do think that really that's a part of the core practices of the Wesleyan movement. And we've got to figure out creative and innovative and new ways using technology like we're doing right now. I mean, why couldn't a group of seminary friends, because of Zoom and other kinds of platforms, be able to do that kind of work regularly in those kinds of environments? So I think you're absolutely right, Zach. It's something that we have to reclaim if we're going to experience the vitality of sanctifying grace. We keep coming back to the grace thing, of this sanctifying grace piece. And the thing I love about, connected to the 12 steps and the Celebrate Recovery, the thing I love about the 12 steps is the 12 steps does a better job at creating that kind of environment than the church does. In 12 steps, when you get to the third step, you darn sure better have a sponsor, because you're not going to do the fourth step without a sponsor. You're not going to do your fearless searching moral inventory, where you litany off, the people that you've hurt and the people who've hurt you and the assets of your life as well as the liabilities of your life, unless there's somebody kind of lovingly peering over your shoulder to keep you honest and to ask the tough questions about that kind of work. And so, I've been prone to say, and truly believe this, that the 12-step community, traditional 12-step, I'm talking about where they don't believe in, it's higher power. It's not the triune God. It's the higher power. That they do a better job at discipling their folks than we do in the church. And we've got a lot to learn from the 12-step community about that.
And I think that's what drew me in to what you all are doing, because I think you said that at Church of Resurrection many years ago. And ever since that time, I've kind of just been sitting back and studying it. And then, prayerfully, when when would be a good time to talk about this in a congregation? And it seems like just as when I get ready to do that, I get moved. That's just the brilliance of our system. But I'm hoping in this current appointment, I'm hoping that this is actually going to be a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And that's been the conversation since day one that we've been having is, what can we do to make deeper disciples of Jesus Christ? Because, we could, I think any church can go and, we can put up a dog and pony show and people are going to come and,
sure.
but that's not going to make disciples. And we've been wrestling since I've been here, this whole idea of what does it mean to be a disciple and what does that look like? And how do we, because the whole idea of being a disciple is replicating, and how do we replicate that for our congregation? And I know that that's like the big push right now. The big buzzword in our denomination is, do you have your discipleship plan? And it's just like, and so, I think that there are opportunities for that out there. And, I think what you all do is just brilliant because you are meeting a need in a big way. And that's something like in Oklahoma where we have some of the higher uses of opiates and other, issues that I really wish our churches would kind of look at and say, hey, maybe we ought to think about this and get people together and on board and, that sort of thing.
Well, it clearly the opiate epidemic has come to everywhere. I mean, we think of it as an urban problem, but it's probably worse in the rural settings than it is in the urban settings, just because of space and Breaking Bad kind of probably helped that.
Right.
Where that's just a part of it is a part of the fabric of America today. And I do think, one of the things that I've said and written about some has been this whole idea of what I call spiritual malpractice. And it's the idea that I define spiritual malpractice as offering Jesus, the healer, without offering the people, the places, and the processes for people to heal.
Yeah.
And so what well-intentioned, seminary-trained, licensed people like us do is we stand up and we say, Jesus Christ can fix your life. Your life is better if you connect your life to Christ. Your life will be more fulfilled and meaningful. And if we're honest, we say it doesn't mean life's going to be easy. You're going to still experience the same hardships that everybody else does, but you will have, peace at the center. You'll have an anchor. You'll have a family. You'll have the resources of the kingdom of God to navigate through life's difficulties. And I believe the people that are sitting in our church that are listening to us are going, yes, I want that. I want that. And then they say, how? And they might get the dumb stare from the, well, join a Sunday school class, or come to my Bible study. And that's good, but it's not complete. And it's not, look at the ministry of Jesus. I mean, I love John Wesley, but I love Jesus more. Look at the ministry of Jesus. He invested in 12. You could argue that he really invested in 3, in Peter, James, and John. And so, when the God of the universe was thinking, what's the best way to have the loving overtake of planet Earth, God said, I'm going to send myself through my son, and be born of a virgin. We do that whole thing. We're right at the cusp of Advent, and I'm going to set up a big tent and speakers, and we're going to draw big crowds. No, that's not what he did. He called 12 men and a handful of women around him, and he poured and invested and modeled it for the kingdom, and then basically said, I'm getting ready to go, and I want you guys to do what I've done. And flash ahead 2,000 years later, and I happen to pastor a mega church. I hate that term, but we think that that's the epitome of what it means to be faithful, and I just don't believe that. I just don't. I think I honestly think that it's more about these tight knit, and I don't mean closed in, but it's about disciples of Jesus who are living richly and deeply in community with one another. And that's significantly bigger than drawing a big crowd. Because one of the things we got to remember, it's interesting. It's John 6:66, 666, is that verse that talks about people abandoning Jesus because what he said was tough.
Right.
The invitation, and we have to be careful that it keeps coming back to the grace thing, that we don't. And I've been guilty of it, so I'm going to be the first one to stand up and repent of this. That we're not guilty of selling cheap grace instead of costly grace, to borrow from Bonhoeffer. We need to invite people into this great adventure of following Jesus, but remember that we're inviting them into a disciple journey, a journey of being a follower of Jesus, and that involves my cooperation and my sacrifice and my self-emptying and all of those kinds of things to be fully engaged in it. And I'm still on that journey myself. I'm not the poster child for it, but trying to figure out as I get closer to 60 how to do it better. So.
Right. Well, and that's what's so refreshing about these conversations and why we have them this way, because those that are listening aren't likely part of mega churches. They're all in rural communities. They're trying to figure out how to be a part of these groups. We intentionally created this space, this podcast, to create space for that, for people to come together, have the conversations, and be a part of a community that otherwise they wouldn't have. Or could have it on the go, something that fits them. Yeah. And so to sit down and be like, look, you've got 3 people here that we don't have a clue. We don't have it figured out yet. We're just trying. We're just trying to move and get better to tomorrow than we were today. Yeah. And there's a lot of grace in that. But that's the thing. It's just finding those spaces and finding the opportunities, and us as pastors, enabling and empowering not only ourselves, but the people in our midst to create these spaces as well, to be with people, to, send those folks out as well.
Yeah. This morning, this is Tuesday, and this morning, I was meeting with a group of about a dozen guys that we've been meeting together, some constellation, not everybody's the same, but for almost the full run of the 21 years I was here. And ironically today, we've been walking slowly through 1 Corinthians, and we bought N.T. Wright's, the Bible for every day, for every, the name of that book, this one, 1 Corinthians for everyone. And we were working through it, and so we'll take 3 years to go through a book of the Bible. We just kind of go really slow. And it was interesting, today's conversation. This is a group of, I was the only paid Christian in the room, It was just kind of 11 guys from the age of, 70 down to 35 maybe. And 11 of us sitting in the room. And we're talking about what does it mean for us to protect the unity of our group, and how do we live in covenant with one another. We're not doing it perfectly, but we're doing it pretty well. We're doing it pretty well. And we're, 2 of the guys got cancer in that group. They're in their 50s, have cancer, and we've been praying for each other and holding each other up, and asking each other tough questions. And so we're figuring it out. We're figuring it out. And I think that there's a lot of grace in all of this. We got to be careful that we also don't, in the midst of all of this, enter into kind of a perfectionism and works righteousness, right, that we earn our salvation the old-fashioned way. We work hard for it, and that's not, we're not only just saved by grace, we live by grace too. So,
right.
Well, George, we thank you for your time. We know that you have a busy schedule, probably like all of us, or at least have something next on the plate. Right. And so we thank you for your time. You're more than welcome to always come back and be on. We've enjoyed the conversation, and when you have your next book out, just let us know. We'd be glad to have you on.
Yeah, I just got a contract today, or a conversation today about my next book.
Perfect.
So yeah, we'd love to have you on. And so we just want to thank our listeners for listening, and encourage our listeners to go on our website at beardedtheologians.com. We've got all sorts of great content going up. We've got coffee mugs and all sorts of good swag that people can purchase for great Christmas gifts. Realize that the Bearded Theologians are not just about Zach and I. It's about just basically coming together in a conversation and just doing it in new and exciting ways, and actually even old ways of just getting together and having conversation. And so, George, we thank you for your time again. And so I'm Matt Franks.
And I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and we hope that you share our content online through Facebook and social media, and we hope that you check out our Beardcast store at beardedtheologians.com and pick up some great Bearded Theologians gear. We hope you have a good day.